Hello, Frontier Incubators. Sam here from the Social Enterprise Academy, working with Village Capital and the Global Entrepreneurship Network to bring you the thematic capacity building series on scaling and replicating your programs. This is module 1, Before You Scale. So a little bit of onboarding, just to recap the program as a whole. The aim of this program is to build on the other thematic capacity building webinars, particularly financial sustainability, building your mentor networks, building your investor networks. This program will help you think through your issues you may be facing regarding how to scale or replicate what you do, whether that's in your current territory or in new markets in your country or around the world, and also to think through how we manage the challenges that growth throws up in order that we can become more financially sustainable and have a bigger impact. So during this overall program, we're hoping to deepen your understanding of replication and scaling models as a whole, and it may just be reinforcing your current ideas and what you already know. But either way, I hope this series is going to help you to clarify your own selection and design of both strategies and tactics for what it is you're doing in terms of scaling, and also in terms of your execution as well, making sure that we're operationally as efficient as we can be. And so therefore, by the end of the program, hopefully we'll build everyone's confidence in a whole load of tools and techniques being shared for managing implementation of scaling as you go on your scaling journey. So that's the program as a whole. And we'll be drawing on a whole load of resources that are already on the Frontier Incubator's website. And we'll be adding some more in terms of recommended reading as we go through the program as well, which we'll share on Slack. So we've broken the program into 6 modules. This module, Before You Scale, thinking about considerations about our strategy and our readiness before we set off on the scaling journey. Then we'll be looking at our design for scale, some of the deeper things that we can do in the design of our scaling offering and our model for scaling that may be different to our existing business model that can help us to weather the storm and just make sure that we've got the right elements in there as we go. Then we'll look at some examples of successful scaling and learn a few lessons about pre-visualization of what we're trying to do. And we'll look at markets and sales and the pace that we might go at to secure market position and how our scaling journey is going to go over the years to come. We'll also look internally at the resources necessary and how we build our capacity to manage scale. And we'll be looking at the future as well and how we sustain a different level of operation as we go. Now, this linear journey of 6 different modules may not fit your current issues or what you're dealing with right now. So we're going to upload materials from the start into Google Drive so you can access them at any point and jump ahead, do some pre-reading if you'd like, if that's more relevant to you. And as I said, I'm with the Social Enterprise Academy. We'll be hosting all the way through the journey, and we'll be joined by Village Capital and Global Entrepreneurship Network at different points to contribute different content to that journey. We'll also be drawing on a few different case studies from around the world as well. For each module, we'll have a webinar, a seminar, recommended reading, and also some exercises for you to apply back with your teams. And most of this you can do in your own time, asynchronously, tailor your own experience for the information you need when you need it. But if you can join the live seminars, there's real value if we can do those together, sharing the pain, sharing the ideas, hopefully doing some good peer learning and group reflection. So without further ado, module 1, Before You Scale. The learning outcomes for this module are looking at the strategic drivers for scaling, helping you identify what those might be, and then looking at different options for pathways or routes to scale. And finally, assessing your organization's readiness for replication scaling and anything you might need to do to get in place before you set off on that journey. We'll look at strategic drivers and pathways first, then a case study from the Social Enterprise Academy, and we'll finish with various assessments. So first, strategic drivers. Be in no doubt that the world needs you to scale. I think we're all going to be working towards the Sustainable Development Goals. And if we're going to achieve this, then our work is vital in helping to scale up the number of organizations that are working towards all of these different targets that are going to keep our societies and our planet healthy. So please do feel on the right side of history in terms of your ambitions to scale up what it is you're doing. Similarly, in terms of the amount of money that's going around the world working for impact, this diagram comes from British Council work back in 2015, looking at the amount of money that is targeted at impact type work. So on the right-hand side of the screen there, you'll see the amounts of money in impact investment, CSR, and aid at the time are incredibly small compared to the amount of money that is going around the world for global trade or global GDP as a whole. So in terms of our work, trying to shift economies towards being more inclusive economies or impact-led economies, our work is again vital in making sure that more organizations are trading with triple bottom line thinking, people, profit, planet, and we can convert more of this money towards working for impact. So again, we're very much legitimized for scaling and hopefully in a more sustainable way. When Social Enterprise Academy first started out and being invited to replicate and scale globally, that was a bit different to the original vision and mission that the organization had been set up with, just to serve communities in Scotland. So we struggled with our internal motivation about why should we replicate around the world. And it was listening to a speech by Mel Young from the Homeless World Cup, who said, if you're doing something good, you have a responsibility to share it. And that really resonated with us about an internal motivation for why to scale and why an organization set up in Scotland should even think to do something around the world. So a couple of key foundational definitions as well, just making sure we're all on the same page and talking about the same thing. Hopefully what we're talking about here is moving from a phase for you in your accelerators where you've been through startup, you're maybe more than 2 years in, you've innovated some programs, you're serving a need that you've spotted, you've prototyped your model and are refining things through being part of the Frontier Incubators program. You've already achieved market entry and you're gaining traction with key stakeholders, key cohorts, key people in the ecosystem. And now what we're talking about is scale up. So we're going for growth. We're going to take what you've already done and look at how that can be replicated or built upon or done at a new pace or in new markets. We're looking at building your teams and then also looking at how can you monetize your systems or impactize them, to coin a phrase, get more impact from maybe doing the same stuff. And that's what this program is all about, moving from startup to scale up. And again, baseline concepts, financially speaking, if we're scaling, what we're actually doing is creating operating leverage. We are creating a significant increase in turnover matched by a smaller increase in operating costs. So all of your business basics around break even and scaling your operation, they come into play when we're talking about scaling. Just making sure that we are profitable organizations able to be around for the long term, wherever our different finances are coming from. Another basics is the old banker's mantra, which we use a lot at work. We talk about turnover is vanity, profit is sanity, and cash is reality. So it keeps you real when you're thinking about your business development and your finances. There's something missing though, and that's impact. So I think we can improve on the old banker's mantra, but I'm trying to struggle to think of a word that fits here, but the best I can come up with is necessity. So if anybody's got anything better than that, impact is necessity, certainly in the current period. Then we can improve on the banker's mantra. But something like that keeps you focused on what it is you're trying to do. We're not trying to be busy fools just doing lots and lots of activities that we neglect our profitability and end up out of business. So the key question therefore is, what are we scaling? What is your vision for scale at the other end of your journey? Is it very, very local or is it global? And what are the principles and values that you're using to guide your decision making on that vision? Is your board aligned with what you're thinking? And what are your drivers for wanting to scale? Are you creating unicorns or zebras in your cohorts? Or is that what you're looking for? And is that what you're looking for from yourself? Your current organization, is it trying to find a scale that is astronomical? You believe so much in what you're doing that it's got value around the world, you could be shipping that out? Or is it about doing a really good quality job for the communities you're serving? Either way, looking at what is a sustainable scale for you and understanding what that sustainable scale is. Certain organizations and their models need to achieve a certain size to gain economies of scale in order that the whole thing works. So understanding what that is key. So that's our first question, is does your team have a clear diagnosis of the opportunity or challenge it's facing so that it's completely aligned? Are you trying to grow your turnover just to sustain your current operation, make sure that everybody gets paid well? Are you looking at greater profitability for building reserves and making sure you're strong? Is it that you're trying to meet demand and actually you need to deliver an awful lot more activity and you need to figure out where the funds are going to come from? or is it that you're looking at creating more impact in an area of significant need, and you need to figure out a strategy for doing that? This means we're really checking on the motivation, and that once we've tuned into what these are, if we can be super clear and share that across the team, it means that we're measuring the right indicators, measuring what matters, making sure we're all staying aligned on all the decisions that flow from here, and that we're keeping our stakeholders close to us as well. And that the rules of the journey start to get set by what it is we're trying to achieve. And it means that we can stay focused on what we're going to do. And again, once you have figured out your drivers, then we're looking at the different options and pathways for how we can scale. If we've worked out our business model and we're flying along and we're doing okay, standing out, then there's lots of different ways that we could scale. And it can be tempting just to rush into different ones, but certainly as entrepreneurs, we're most often in lean startup kind of mode, trying and testing lots of different ways that we're going to do it. If we do figure out a good model that has some sort of strategic advantage, or an asset that is really working, then there may be value in replicating that once we've figured that out. And people may pay to license that sort of stuff in order to accelerate and leverage on something you've already figured out. So again, another tool for us to use just in some sort of internal assessment of how sustainable are you right now, and having a good look at your current operation. Key question is, will scaling help to improve your sustainability, or is it just going to make an existing problem bigger because you haven't figured it out yet in terms of your actual sustainability in your current operation? So having a good triple bottom line type look at your existing organization and figuring out what are the issues, where are you strong and where are you weak? Is it on your finances? Is your model spot on? Have you got good turnover, good profitability, and you can see good market demand for what it is that you're doing? Or are you needing to scale and diversify in order to get your existing costs covered? Just being very clear on your financial reality there. Similarly, your people, your team, the networks you're building around you, are they motivated and empowered, sticking with you and ready to go in terms of scaling you up, got the right skill sets? Or do you need to recruit new people, or need to find new ways to keep people engaged with you? Environmentally, have you got a costly model, or is it really tight and you're actually implementing your supply chains, and your impact scaling is going to be happening really, really well because of the way that you've designed your operation in some sort of circular way or with supply chain influence? And then similarly, socially and culturally, are you well connected and embedded in the communities you're in at the moment, including stakeholders? Have you got a group of people that are going to go with you on this journey for scaling? Or a community development method that means that you can access new networks and new communities as you go really, really well. So having a good look at your internal operation and ask some of those questions that will clarify again, is your scaling journey going to help improve your current sustainability, or is it going to trade on your reserves, your bank of energy in order to scale? Or do you have a problem going on that you're trying to fix, but actually by scaling or replicating, you may just make that problem an awful lot worse? Let's just get clear on that. There are many different routes to scaling, and often the one that's forgotten is just optimizing what you're currently doing in order to make yourselves more profitable or efficient. It's a great place to start. And here's some inspiration from Jakarta. Once you're optimized, are you maximizing your sales? Have you got as good a sales and business development practice as you possibly can? Are you maximizing all your opportunities for selling your current products? Diversification. It's often tempting as entrepreneurs to think of the next thing, the next business idea, but sometimes diversification can really build on what we've already got, extending our brand, or bringing in a new income stream that is essential to actually prop up something that's not quite working. And therefore different tactics for diversification. Maybe you can integrate it back into your original business and be gaining economies of scale and advantage from that. That really, really works. Either way, the different paths for scaling any kind of business, again, business basics in many ways, it's worth considering with your team. How best can you optimize what you're doing? How can you maximize your current sales? And only then maybe diversify or replicate. As entrepreneurs, it is very tempting to go off and think of new business ideas to bring those in, but worth a review of what we're doing. in different paths to scale. And a couple of, again, business basic grids just to apply back to ourselves and our accelerators. The Ansoff matrix, I'm sure many of you are familiar with, but worth thinking through, again, with the products you've already developed, your existing markets, can you achieve scale by just going for good solid market penetration in the areas that you're already in, increasing usage, making sure that your current customers, not only your cohorts, but your potential investors or strategic funders are bought in and seeing a real value in you? Will they pay for extra things, and can they be upsold on what you're doing? And again, that you're increasing your impact and sustainability in your existing market. If you have got good products, but you can be building more, and again, listening to the needs of your customers, then a product development strategy might extend your brand into a couple of other things, which again may make you more sustainable without having to shift out of your current market that you're just becoming established in. If you've already got a good suite of products that you're spotting demand from elsewhere in terms of the different geography, different areas of the country, or places beyond the borders of where you're working at the moment, maybe there are new customer segments you can ship that out to in market development terms. And then finally, diversification with new products into new markets, which may be a strategy to bring in new income streams that you may have looked at under the financial sustainability modules. But again, an example of that may be running an accelerator and diversifying into co-working in order to try and bring in a different income stream, maybe a backward diversification, or forwards if you're trying to create a pipeline that would then take space in your co-working space, for example. That's an example of diversification, which can be a distraction and high risk as well from your existing business model. So again, worth with your teams, just plotting on there your different business ideas. Where do they fit, and what does that mean for the types of activity you need to engage in, that you need to resource? Similarly, looking at different scaling strategies with two different axes there. One, how effectively do you collaborate with others, or do you want to collaborate with others? And two, how adaptable is your model or your brand and what you're doing? If you just want to work on in your own area and you're not into really collaborating with others beyond perhaps partnering on a bid or a funding bid, something like that, and you've got a fairly static model that it just does one thing really well, then actually growing your organization and building your own capacity is not a bad strategy. Keep it simple. If you can collaborate well with others, then maybe sharing out your knowledge through licensing with others. If you've got a really, really good product that actually by doing it in this way, you know it's going to really work well, then licensing or some sort of Creative Commons style shifting of your model could be a really good way to spread the impact really, really fast in working with others. If you, again, you're not looking to collaborate too much, but you can adapt to new areas, build your team, then expanding to new sites could become the way. But if you really think that actually collaborating with others and adapting what you've got into new areas is the way to go, then social franchising, joint ventures become options in that mix. So again, another framework just to enable thinking around different options for different approaches to spreading your models. And this grid puts it pretty well from Nesta in making it big, strategies for scaling and social innovation. One of the items on our reading list for this module. A great grid looking at different models and approaches depending on the different routes to scale that we might want to take. And most of us, certainly through the startup phase, will just be concerned with the lowest level of this, or the fourth area of that grid, growing an organization to deliver. Certainly getting it set up in one area is the first thing. But then as a scaling strategy as well, just sticking with the same organization, setting up new branches, employing your own teams, building staff teams, building networks of people that are working for you is a valid way to grow your organization. You don't have to be any more innovative than that, and you can focus on that. Many of us, though, will be thinking about some of these other areas and different options for what we could do. Forming strategic partnerships with others, making sure that we are working with our ecosystem partners in consortiums, winning bids, creating alliances, and sharing knowledge of what we do, building those relationships. Joint ventures where it's appropriate in a legal form, or even merging or acquiring other organizations can be a route to scale that we don't often think about. Building a delivery network as well. That's one of the most common ways for accelerators or incubators to recruit new mentors, recruit new facilitators. And I know that from working with a few of you that this is an area that's coming up an awful lot, and creates those issues of how do you make sure your delivery networks are going to stick with you for the long term? How do you build those communities of practice and make sure that agreements are in place and they're bought into your culture and your values so they stick with you? Whether it's a licensing route or a franchising route or just good collaborations. Building a network can extend your reach and impact beyond your core team and allow you and your core team to focus on key processes or business development. Similarly, it may be that actually what you're looking to scale is on a different level, and actually by advising or influencing government or in other areas. For example, if you're a university or a think tank or something like that, then that may play more to your strategic strengths. So a whole different area of scaling, and actually what you scale through is selling some of your skills and services in training or programs that influence and advise at a different level. So a really useful grid, and again, a touch point for us with our teams, just to look at the different options that are available and have a think through what that might mean for our organization. And the reality may be that you may do several of these different methods, but understanding which is your primary choice for scaling and where do you put your effort in. So that takes us through the first half of the current webinar. If you want to pause at this point and take a break and to review, the next part is going to be a case study. So it's a good chance for you to stop and grab a cup of tea. The next part will last another 15 to 20 minutes. Okay, so if you're ready to go, welcome to today's case study, which is going to be on replication. And it's close to home for me. It's with the replication of the Social Enterprise Academy, all the way from Scotland over the last 6 years, replicating around the world, based on a track record of the last 15 years in sunny Scotland. This is Edinburgh, and Scotland has one of those reputations as a very beautiful country, and you often see very stunning images of mountain scenery and wild nature, very remote and classically beautiful. But what these kind of pictures often hide is Scotland's history of very, very disadvantaged communities. Like many, many nations, what we're seeing is huge inequalities still exist. All the issues of the Sustainable Development Goals still exist, even in developed nations as well, with gender equality, poor housing, inequalities in education, in healthcare as well. And we're all still living on the same planet, so we all have the same environmental considerations globally, but also local environmental considerations too. So just like anywhere, social enterprise has emerged very, very strongly in Scotland based on decades of community-oriented enterprise that was already present in Scottish society. And in that context, Social Enterprise Academy emerged and was created by some of the existing ecosystem players back in 2004, who recognized that some of the social enterprises that were starting to be created in communities were not responding well to training from the corporate sector that was kind of being brought in and being held up as the right way to go. And it recognized that actually there were some really good educators who could facilitate learning in the communities for and by practitioners. And so from that route, the Social Enterprise Academy was created back in 2004, based on a model of learning development that actually came back to the UK from around the world, and really focusing on holding safe spaces for facilitating learning, creating safe space for people to share what's really going on for them, gain support from their peers, using all the different skills of dialogue and strengthening their own sense of self-belief and understanding of what they could potentially do, and taking time away from the hard slog of work, creating space for them to have their own thoughts and bring those ideas back to work and to actually change what they were doing in practice. So it started off by serving people in Scotland's communities and really focused on topic areas of leadership, enterprise, social impact measurement, and personal development and learning. We've also then, over time, developed Model Serve Scotland's schools. And that's been going great guns and has roughly reached half of the schools in Scotland, helping to change mindsets and set the next generation on a course for seeing social enterprise as an option. And most recently, being featured now in an annual takeover of The Big Issue, a street paper in the UK, showcasing what the next generation of schools is all up to, not only in Scotland now, but also in London. And we've been piloting that as well in Australia and Malawi as a great generational change lever. So the Social Enterprise Academy grew up in the context of Scotland, where as a small nation with only 6 million population, it has nearly 6,000 social enterprises, growing at a rate of about 200 net growth a year. 64% led by women and 34% of them in rural areas, now accounting for 5% of Scotland's workforce and a contribution of 3% towards GDP. So really starting to get there as a feature of the economy. And we're just waiting for the 2019 update to the census so we can see what the current state of play is. But that is where they all are on the map, or were in 2017. Organisations all over the map, both in the urban areas and in the rural areas, and you'll notice on the islands as well, where we have incredible community engagement, and social enterprise being a fantastic vehicle for communities to own their own assets and trade and make sure that those communities are able to grow and become more sustainable, even in away from the urban infrastructure down the central belt of Scotland at the lower part of that map. And at all stages of growth, these social enterprises are growing and receiving support from a range of ecosystem support providers across the country. And they all have development needs, not just in the startup phase, but as they're growing. Entrepreneurs and their teams don't know what they need to know until they need to know it. And that was one of the areas that the Social Enterprise Academy was built around, providing good quality learning and development for all stages of growth and at all levels of career, developing the workforce and helping to change mindsets. And so in terms of the Social Enterprise Academy model, it's been about trying to deliver programs relevant to the learners wherever they may be. So from this map, you can see that we've developed two staff teams in the yellow dots, one based in Edinburgh, one based in Inverness, to serve the populations in the north and south of the country. We deliver programs that are not bringing people to one central point, but are facilitated in the community in different venues, wherever people may be, facilitated by practitioners who are also quite often local to those communities, although we do travel as well. A couple of different business models. We offer a fee-for-service selling learning programs to organizations that can afford it. And we also work with strategic stakeholders, funders and foundations, and the government and so on, buying on behalf of the learners that can't afford the accelerators or the learning that they need, the ones that are really changing the world. So our market is built up of all sorts of different organizations that can afford to buy. And the job of the staff team is to sell those learning programs and those opportunities, or bid for procurement opportunities as and when they come up. We build consortia, and we've built proficiencies in managing contracts, but also building community and doing community development style approach, which means that we can stay in touch with the organizations and their needs and make sure that we're not an organization that just operates at a national level and isn't connected to people on the ground. Over 15 years, the Academy has built a suite of learning programs with more than 30 baseline programs that can all be adapted, responsive to the cohort that you're working with. And more than 100 different activities go with those baselines, and each baseline can then be adapted by the facilitator relative to whichever cohort they're working with. So that bank of learning programs has been evolved over time with contributions of dozens of our facilitators on the ground, adding new elements to that over time. And that's one of the elements that we've been sharing and making sure that we can provide learning development that is responsive and also now accredited for the last 10 years with the Institute of Leadership and Management, making sure that learners can access a qualification through work-based learning and don't have to take time away from work to do something that's got value in terms of the curriculum framework, and actually they can convert that and articulate it into a university degree if they get enough credits and have found value in doing that as a qualification. So overall, we've been monitoring and measuring our impact every 3 years for the last 12 years, and so have therefore got data about how it's working for behavior change for the individuals, the impact of that behavior change on their organizations, and increasingly sustainable organizations, and the impact of that on their ability to change the world and create impact in their communities and the economy. The overall financial model of the Social Enterprise Academy in Scotland as well is based on winning strategic funds or strategic contracts, also major contracts like government procurement and funding bids, alongside client sales directly, and fees to learners makes up a very small part of our model. And now and then we also take capacity funds to invest in building our team and so on. So a classic sort of social enterprise model with diversified income streams, but all from the sale of learning and development programs. And over time, the model of the Academy has changed. So you can see when it first started, it was really just based on strategic funds, one major funding source, and then started to win additional contracts and made a small amount of money from learner fees in those first 3 years, which is quite possibly where you and your accelerators are at the moment, starting to grow and diversify income streams and to prove out your models and to start to have a track record and a staff team that's now ready to grow and to scale. It was really from year 4 that a different orientation and a change of CEO from the founding CEO started to build a whole new income stream, which was selling to clients. And over the next 3 years, we can see that started to stabilize our business model with income diversified across 3 different areas, not just the 2 in the product development and early phase. So over the growth of the Academy, the startup and product development phase lasted 2 to 3 years, followed by a phase of sales and market development focus. And then it was only latterly after 2012 that we started to get invited to replicate and diversify into a social license model. So the different skill sets that were required as we went through that period were really becoming sales ready, having got the original products and the facilitator network set up, then becoming procurement ready and being able to tender and bid successfully for government contracts. Then as we looked at replication and moving internationally, becoming investment ready. We hadn't had to do that before that point, but you can see down at the bottom here, the red elements of the graph show that we took some capacity funds in order to meet the challenge of potential replication. Use that money to become replication ready and get our systems sorted out and to look at what sort of model we could be using for going international. And then the last piece of the puzzle for us is becoming export and international procurement ready, where we started to trade internationally and becoming ready to bid for larger contracts and work with primes on an international level. So over 15 years, the different proficiencies that we've needed to learn as we've entered different markets, as we've tested different products, and as we have grown the organization up to a different scale. It's needed investment at certain points, so making sure that we have kept our investors and our strategic partners really, really close. We've taken impact investment in terms of debt from the Big Issue Invest, Social Investment Scotland, alongside strategic grant investment from Scottish Government, Hines and Hines Enterprise as well, and also gained a raft of support from other agencies along the way. When we first started to get invited to replicate, we did exactly what we've been talking about in this webinar, looking at what are our strategic drivers for growth and for meeting this demand that we can see from overseas. And that helped our board to consider the opportunities and consider whether or not to approve responding to the replication demand. So seeing that we could reach an awful lot more people, whilst also sustaining jobs in Scotland and building on the specialisms and functions in Scotland, improving the quality of what we were doing and ensuring there was a flow of knowledge and information, so that we would be building a global team, leveraging on what our experience had been in Scotland, but also feeding back and sharing good practice. They could see that the opportunity was worth a go, and approved the first 2 phases of our replication. We also created a whole business plan, which we'll look at later in the webinar series, and focused on 3 strategic objectives backed up by principles that kept us going in the right direction, which we improved on over time. We also did a whole load of scenario planning and forecasting, which we'll look at again later, and looked at the characteristics of different phases of replication, where, like any product launch, a pilot phase allowed us to test and try a few different methods before stabilizing and building resilience into a core team that could then operate more efficiently. And we are finally moving into a whole new phase of scaling up right now in 2019, where we are now operating a hub network that is far bigger than we were when we first started out on the scaling journey. So part of the scenario planning looked like this. We predicted a fairly typical kind of J curve or an S curve of sales, just going up and up and up. But the phases of a pilot phase followed by a phase 1 stabilizing, phase 2 of growth, and phase 3 entering more difficult markets for us is what we predicted back in 2012. And this is what it actually looked like. This is what's happened. So those first few years, the red elements just operating in Scotland, you can see that we've sustained and not taken our eye off the ball in terms of keeping the Scottish market and service to Scottish communities going. But all of the coloured elements from 2012 onwards through the pilot and phase 1 of replication show delivery in other countries and by other country teams, to the point where last year our delivery outside our domestic market was now equaling the delivery inside it. And it just shows how long it takes to enter new markets, build new teams, help to secure funds, and get them delivering at a similar sort of level. So we're broadly on track from what we forecast, although it shows the realities of the real world rather than just a modeling scenario. And that's what it looks like in terms of our strategic partnerships with organizations in other parts of the world, where we've innovated a social license model, putting our model into local hands to adapt and operate in their countries, and operate as a social license network globally, sharing ideas and knowledge and leveraging on a bank of products that we're innovating and sharing together. As we've gone, we've found at different points the need to articulate more clearly the different principles and values we're using to make decisions and how we are going about the building of this network. We'll talk about that later in our webinar series. And in terms of growth of the teams that are operating this, as you can see from when we started in Scotland, we started with only 3 or 4 people, and we built that team up in Scotland over time in response to contract wins and as we've been able to secure different funding packages and client sales. And then with replication, you can see that by engaging new teams in other countries, the amount of people that are working with us is starting to really grow at a different pace now that those teams are starting to work. And so over time, those same phases of development, from the early stages of product development to developing markets and then replicating, you can see the different growth rates. And the different structures of our organization changed as well, from an original functional structure to more of a divisional structure with people working in different geographies on routine tasks, and then a matrix structure where a core team supports teams in different geographical locations to operate delivery, which looks something like this. The core team in yellow servicing the Scotland team, which has now grown to a serious size, which has different geographical units or thematic teams working on the education and schools piece rather than adults and communities. and then a small team managing all the different replications with partners around the world, with a board supporting all of that, and facilitators supporting the learners on the ground, wherever they may be. So that has evolved over time to that sort of scale and in response to demand. But actually, what it looks like now is this. This has all been built with the contributions of hundreds and hundreds of people around the world, lots of effort, lots of engagement with our stakeholders, lots of testing and trialing, and delivery by people on a local level in a range of languages, making sure that content is tailored and localized and is actually relevant to support people who are changing the world wherever they may be. So it's always nice to see some of the faces behind the graphs. And also the reciprocal visits to Scotland have been particularly special for us, where we're seeing a lot of that learning that's going on around the world coming back and influencing what's going on here. So that's just a quick overview and a look at the Social Enterprise Academy as a quick case study of growth and scaling. It's written up in a much better way in a replication case study, which is available on the Social Enterprise Academy website and in the Frontier Incubator's resources. And it goes into a lot of the different elements that we've used in designing the replication package. So we'll draw on that throughout the webinar series. So coming back to your organizations and a series of self-assessments that you can do at this point before you scale. Number one, strategic drivers, making sure you can articulate what your drivers are. What are your rationales for scaling? What's it all about? And can your team articulate what it is you're trying to do? If they can, then fantastic. You don't have to spend too much time on this, but just be specific as you can. And can you articulate your business case for scaling, maybe in impact terms and in financial terms at very least? Where is it you want to get to? Secondly, what kind of pathways have you been considering so far? What sort of models are you thinking about? Not in your current business model, but in your scaling model. Do any of these as potential routes suit you? And please do look at the Nesta reading and have a look at those different options and have a good discussion with your team. Is there something you haven't thought of? Sometimes these things come along, like mergers and acquisitions, as an opportunity may present itself if there's an organization going out of business where you could leverage on that. Or consortia might come out of the blue where suddenly 2 or 3 organizations may need to get together to make a larger bid. So some of these things can be unpredictable, but which ones fall into the right sphere for you? And then third, replication readiness assessment. Again, in the reading, you'll find the Social Franchising Manual from Social Enterprise UK. There's a really useful replication readiness test in there based around the acronym of cloned firm. And it gives you a bunch of questions just to ask your organization to see, do you have the right buy-in from staff, team and board for what it is you're trying to do in terms of replication or scaling? Is what you're doing currently transferable in terms of the knowledge and methods, or do you need to translate it in different languages and so on? Have you got all your systems and procedures in place so they can be easily given to somebody else to operate what you do in another place? Can you see there's need or demand from different places that actually want your model in a new location? Have you evaluated what you do, and do you have proof and evidence that your model is really working? And are you able to duplicate it in an easy way in a different location? How's your finance? Is it sustainable? Is it stable? Is it attractive as a thing to replicate? Or are you going to be replicating something that's still not quite working? And your identity, do you have a brand that is really going to work? Or are you limited by your brand to a certain geography? Do you need to create something new? Just be careful around that one. We'll talk about that in webinar 2. Is what you're doing really impactful and valuable? And are there other rewards that an organization might want if you're going to replicate and share it with them? And can you clearly codify your model and line it up so that, again, it can be easily handed to another organization to operate? With this assessment, you give yourself a score once you've done it, if you rate each one out of 10, and look at where are you now. Give yourself a score and note down why that score is what you've given it. are there areas of strength, weakness? Are there areas of opportunity or threats to your current business? And therefore, look at then what it is you need to work on in those different areas of the replication readiness assessment in order to improve your score. So one thing you can do is for each of those areas, use post-it notes down a wall, give yourself a score on one post-it note and note down why it is given that score. And then a second post-it note in a different color on the same question, what is it you could do to improve your replication readiness or your scaling readiness? Give yourself a checklist and an action list, and it's a great way to involve your staff in thinking about how close you are and how ready and what sort of journey you need to make in order to become replication ready or scaling ready. You may need to think about taking investment and how long it might take you to get ready as well. So this sort of process can help you figure out whether you can achieve this on your current resources or whether you need to get something in play. And that is us for today. That's the end of the webinar. So a quick review. Through this module, we've been talking about strategic drivers, knowing why you're scaling and what it is you're trying to grow. Looking at a few different options for scaling pathways and making sure we're all clear on the potential different ways that we could do it and that we're selecting the right options, or maybe there's something I hadn't thought about. And then we've been looking at assessing organizational readiness for replication or scaling and just asking some of those questions internally. So we've raised some of those issues on the webinar. We'll be discussing them in the seminar. Please do join us live next week. The recommended reading for this module, these three different sources: the Making It Big, Strategies for Scaling Social Innovation, looks at the different pathways. The Insights into Social Franchising asks also some really good questions internally for your organization before you do scale, so worth having a look at that. And then the Social Franchising Manual, again, whether you're thinking of franchising or not, or licensing, it's still a really useful test of readiness for scaling and replication that you can apply for your own organization. You can also look in the Google Drive link from Slack, and you'll find the Social Enterprise Academy replication case study worth a look as well. On the in the Google Drive and shared on Slack, we'll be posting this document with a range of reading and links to access these different resources online or through the Frontier Incubator's Google Drive as well. And then the exercises that we just showcased at the end of the webinar there, those are the three to try with your teams if you're up for it. I'm sure you're all really good facilitators. So just facilitating your teams with some of those different models or those different questions. You can access these slides in the Google Drive. By all means, use them to base your own facilitated session with your team on and generate your answers. If you have a chance to do it before the seminar, then great. Then by all means, bring in any results or any thoughts to the seminar and we'll discuss them then. Equally, during the seminar, we don't have to stay focused on these questions. By all means, bring any relevant questions that you need to tackle at the moment, and we'll use the peer group to think it all through. So thank you for listening to this webinar on Before You Scale. Next time, webinar 2, module 2, will be Designing to Scale, and we'll look at some of the different ingredients for how you design a really strong organization for scaling up. Looking at not just the business model that you're currently operating, but your scaling business model, the core of your business, being able to articulate what that is, looking at revised value propositions for scaling, and also elements and dimensions of replication, and how designing some of these things in mean that we can get away from ideas that we need to be looking at intellectual property and so on. There are lots of different tactics that we can deploy in our scaling models. So that's next time. Thank you for listening. Please do engage with the resources on the Frontier Incubator's website and on the Scaling Programs channel on Slack. And we will see you next time. Thanks for listening.